All right, everybody. I haven't done one of these sort of monologues in a while, and I wanted to do one today. Today is August 19, 2022. So I want to talk about a few different things. So just kind of be all over the place. One of the things I want to talk about is knowledge. I guess you would say epistemology. How do we know what we know, and how we think we know certain things. So the example that came to mind to start with is most people will remember in their teens being, adamantly sure about certain things. Oftentimes it may have been debates or outright argument with your parents, and you were sure that they were absolutely wrong. And at that time, for example, I used to laugh when I hear some older people say they didn't trust doctors. And, as I get older, I think, oh, maybe there's a reason. They had their reasons for thinking that. But even anyways, as a teenager, some of you may also recall, maybe just a few years, I like to use the number 5, where 5 years go by, and then you look back on 5 years later, say from 18 to 23, and of course at 23 you think you've now become older and wiser at the ripe old age of 23, and you laugh at some of the things you thought were true at 18, now that you've, of course, discovered what's really true at 23, only to, at 28, for example, come to the same conclusions about some of your convictions of when you were 23. But the thing that repeats itself, though, until a few years later for many of us, is that we continually start to think that now we've sort of found how the world works and what's really going on, and we're not real good at shades of gray. Of course, as we get a little bit older, I think with some wisdom comes with the idea of, the old saying, the more you know, the more you realize how little you know, is you start to be more open, which is one of the things I've talked about in the past, is that I try not to do any more absolutes than I really know of firsthand, because a lot of the knowledge that I think I have came to me secondhanded. In other words, I did not experience it firsthand. I did not do the research firsthand. I read about it. I'm told that everybody knows this. I'm told that this is accepted theories and things like that. So I try to go with, based on the evidence that I'm aware of, based on the experience that I've had, this or that makes the most sense to me. And I've talked about this in other entries that I've made. And keep an open mind that, if I am presented with other evidence or other experiences, that I will reevaluate. And I think for me, maybe thinking now I'm getting old, I think that's a better way of looking at it. Now, the reason I bring up those examples, though, is I seem to see this happening just in individuals, but in groups like societies, like scientific communities and whatnot, where once people get to a certain level of advancement, it becomes almost dogmatic, where it's like, well, now we know, and then people who are challenge it are often ridiculed, attacked, called kooks, and called quacks and things like that. And then if they stick to their guns, a few years later, all of a sudden it seems like, oh, well, maybe they were right after all. And then a new paradigm or a new way of looking at things occurs. And you think, well, we should have learned from the last time that knowledge is evolving all the time. And it's not really that sometimes things are right or wrong. It could be that they're incomplete. Sometimes you just have part of the puzzle. And yet it seems to me that, I don't know if it's arrogance or being naive, that these things repeat themselves, particularly in the field of medicine, biology, and things like that, because living things, human beings and all living creatures, are incredibly complex. And if you look back just 50, 100 years ago and see how our understanding of these things has changed dramatically, we laugh at it now, but we laugh at it from a point of view as though now we've found the answers. not realizing that the people back then thought they had the answers as well. So, part of it I'm thinking, blind faith. The doctor said I should do it, I'm doing it. Versus cynicism, the other example, I don't trust doctors at all, none of them know what they're talking about, is probably too wrong. I like the idea of healthy skepticism, questioning, not, thinking for yourself ultimately, versus dogma. So, at one point, you can't know everything. You can't know everything firsthand. You have to put your faith in experts. I don't really like that term, but people whose field is the field that they focus on. You can't know how to fix your car, renovate your home, fix a leaky roof, your plumbing, your electrical work, or various things, even though sometimes you're taking people's word for it and they may or may not be doing what's, the right repair to your car or fixing what's really the problem with your electrical in your house or whatever it is, but you have to put your faith because you can't know everything. So, I talked about incomplete versus right or wrong. But the other thing too is I look back at medicine and you look back at things that were done, because a doctor, you don't feel good, you go see a doctor, your doctor wants to make you feel better. So if you feel better, a lot of times things that were done and made people feel better were seen, well, we did a good thing. This person didn't feel well, now they feel better. But feeling better is not necessarily being better, because there's lots of ways. So, one of the things that sort of ignited this, we were talking about Dr. Pepper and the fact that at one time it was a tonic that was used to feel better. And like Coca-Cola and things like that, I think it had other things in it. Who knows, some of the older stuff had derivatives of opium, heroin, cocaine, things like that. And there's no question they probably made people feel better. Cocaine makes people feel better. So it's kind of like thinking, well, if you feel better, but is it making things better in the short run and possibly worse in the long run? Well, we look at it and we laugh at the tonics of yesteryear and Dr. Pepper and things like that. But if you think about it, and I'm not a medical person here, so, but today, a lot of people are being prescribed antidepressants and sleep aids. And so antidepressants and sleep aids don't heal anything. They basically, arguably they, especially in the case of antidepressants, they take chemical imbalances between neurotransmitters and try to put them back, but they do so artificially. And I want to really quickly say, anybody listening to this, if your doctor has prescribed you antidepressants, don't listen to anything I say without talking to a doctor, because some people who suffer from deep depression could be suicidal, and those antidepressants could in fact be saving their lives. And if there are some side effects from using them, if it prevents them from committing suicide, well, then that's the lesser, obviously, of evils. But the point is, in those cases, obviously it seems justified, but it seems like antidepressants are being prescribed like candy. In previous occupation, I worked in life insurance, so we asked a lot of people medical questions in terms of their health in order to qualify for life insurance, and it's incredible how many people are on antidepressants. And interestingly, the insurance companies didn't like that. And it wasn't so much the depression that people were being trained for, or anxiety, or whatever the case may be. It was as a result of the side effects of the antidepressants. So, how different is it for people to be given a tonic, Dr. Pepper, of course now you need a prescription, to make you feel better, and being given various drugs, whether it's Valium or all these different things that are done in order to make it feel better. And so I kind of wonder, are we really that far ahead? And what is the long-term pain from feeling good in the short term to that. And in many cases, we're only going to know in hindsight. There are drugs that were on the market for decades before they were taken off the market. And then in people's personal life, of course, they may find out only after the fact, and they may never find out because the evidence you see and the evidence you don't see. So if your health deteriorates over time as a result of whether it's antidepressant or some other treatment that you're receiving, you'll never know what you would have felt like had you not had that treatment. So you really don't have a control group yourself. You're just one person. So, and interestingly too, is we look back on old advice that we ridicule. So one of the things we ridicule, getting to something a little bit different here, is people who used to have heart disease were told by doctors to take it easy and not exert themselves. But of course, people will say, well, no, if you have heart disease, the best thing you can do is aerobic exercise to condition yourself. And so, now we ridicule, telling people to take it easy when they had heart disease was the worst thing they could do because they were getting less fit. And I use those terms in quotes because some of those words are like fit, don't really have really great definitions. But, you take it easy. And to some extent, if you think about it, if you do have a potential for a heart attack, it is possible that heavy exertion could bring it on. So there was some reasons that certainly must have seemed valid to those doctors at the time for giving that advice rather. So then we turn around and say that, no, you should be active and do all this exercise. But then the mistake I think was made is the pendulum swings over, and as pendulums swing, they tend to swing over too far. So now the advice is to do, as much exercise as you can in some cases. And I think it's a matter of a happy medium. You don't want to be completely sedentary. You want to stay somewhat active. I want to do strength training. I have obviously some biases around that because I think that is beneficial in many ways and actually more beneficial than so-called cardio exercise when done properly. But you don't want to overdo it because if you overdo exercise, no matter what kind it is, in other words, if you create more stress on your body, whether it's from exercise than anything else, then you're actually, it's going to start to go the other way, because if you put more stress in your body that overwhelms your body's ability to deal with that stress, whether it's from exercise, whether it's from sleep deprivation, whether it's from stress in your personal life, things like that, the results are not good. Complete lack of stress, and you deteriorate. And then too much stress and you're not able to deal with it. So the older I get, I may have said this before, I'm realizing that Goldilocks was one of the wisest. Goldilocks and the Three Bears had a lot of wisdom in it. In other words, not too much, not too little, just right. So the other thing about the medical community, and I started with the idea of, not trusting doctors versus putting blind faith, whether putting skepticism. There's a book by Dr. Doug McGuff, not as well known as his book Body by Science, but it was written by Primal Prescription. It was entitled, rather, Primal Prescription. And in that book, Doug McGuff talks a little bit about history of the medical community and how at some point in the past, I don't remember the exact date, whether it was the 1800s or the 1700s, there was very little regulation of doctors or people providing medical advice. Essentially, almost anybody could hang up a sign. And of course, there was all sorts of Chinese medicine and different approaches to medicine and all these various things. And somebody came up with the idea that, it was a bit of a Wild West, and there should be regulated and there should be certain, standardization. And so as a result of that, the standards on the one hand were improved from just, anybody and everybody being able to give medical advice, but it also, to some extent, had now less availability because, there obviously, even at that time, the level of science was such that no matter who you were getting advice from, you were probably getting, some of it was erroneous. I mean, they didn't even understand infection at that time and germs and things like that. So you were getting erroneous advice, but you were getting less access to advice because when all of a sudden they said, in order to be called a doctor, you got to take certain courses, you got to meet certain criteria. Well, there were fewer people giving medical advice, or at least fewer people doing so in an approved, regulated way. The other thing that happened, though, is that the people who were creating the regulations were also the people who were providing the courses needed to be certified as a doctor, medical doctor, or whatever the terms came up. So it was kind of like, in a way, almost a conflict of interest. You have to take our course in order to be able to practice medicine. And so, again, what we see in science is all of a sudden this was a thing, and now that's become very dogmatic. And over the years, you saw alternative, chiropractors, physiotherapists, other modalities were basically considered fringe or alternative or holistic or whatever it is. And depending on who you talk to, it's, one is mainstream or one is logical science-based and other things is quacks and things like that. But of course, Chinese medicine, which is thousands of years old, I mean, some of the things that have survived from that have to have survived because there was some sort of effectiveness to it. And so now there's sort of, I take it with grains of salt. I mean, ultimately, I guess the message here is to think for yourself. And just because people have done schooling and things like that, certainly a good place to go for advice, but not to, I don't think, accept it blindly and just do whatever they say. So, there's a lot to it. And even in his book, Primal Prescription, Doug McGuff talks about staying out of the belly of the beast. And he uses that analogy, the belly of the beast, for the medical system. Basically, once you start to get sick and you start to get prescriptions or you get into the hospital situation, things can snowball where you get one prescription and then as a result of that, you start having side effects from that, and you get a second prescription to offset the side effects of that, and then a third prescription to offset the side effects of the second one or the combination of the first two. And he says, he's an emergency room physician, that, he says, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know it's like 12 or 18 different medications, most of the people coming in. And so once you're in there, so basically he's saying, eat right, exercise properly, keep your weight at a decent level, stay strong, to have good muscles, so that you never have to need the system, or at least delay it for as long as you can. Obviously, if you're in a car accident or you break your arm or things like that, then you're going to need to. Now, the other thing I thought of doing this as a separate one, but I think it's kind of related. And I was going to do a podcast. I was going to entitle it called Beware of Pickleball. So pickleball right now is sort of the latest craze. All kinds of people are starting to play pickleball. And a lot of the people who are starting to do it are older people. And a lot of people apparently have never played it. It's a lot of fun, whatnot. And if people want to play it for recreation, that's one thing, but people say this is good exercise, this is great, and people are flocking to it and saying it's great and great exercise. Now, all court sports, tennis, badminton, whatever it is, basketball for that matter, there's a lot of impacts and there's a lot of lateral tension on the knees. So those things are hard on the knees. And so a lot of people who are going to take this up are going to injure themselves. I'm going to suggest, depending on how much you do it, that you almost inevitably will have issues with your knees, particularly if you're 50, 60 or older and you're taking on this on, especially when you're sedentary, and especially if you're probably carrying more weight than you should be carrying. So yes, recreation, and one of the things that I've talked about with my clients as I'm doing is I talk about, you don't need to do anything outside of the strength room other than stay reasonably active, walking, things like that, not walking for exercise, but just getting up and moving around on a regular basis. I don't do anything that would be called steady state activity on purpose. But having said that, I have a Fitbit watch, and I have a Fitbit watch not because I want to count my steps or care how many steps I get per se. I like that it tracks my sleep patterns because it's one of the things that I want to monitor and improve. And it happens to give me, but it does count the steps. So here, between training my clients, doing work around the house here, we have 8 acres, I have some ducks, things like that. I often get 10,000 steps a day, or sometimes a little more, sometimes less, but I'm not doing it on purpose. I'm just relatively active and I'm moving around regularly throughout the day. And that's all you really need. You don't want to be a couch potato sitting on the couch. And interestingly, according to my Fitbit app, I'll just see if I can share this screen here. And I have no idea whether or not this has any basis in science, anything. I'm not even sure what the term aerobic fitness is. So my resting heart rates, according to this, let's see if you can see this here, in the last, the last 30 days, fluctuated between 56 and 62, which is considered very good. And see this chart here, you'll see, I don't know if you're seeing this in a mirror image here, maybe you are. So this is supposed to be my cardio fitness. So at 47 to 51, so for somebody 60 plus, I'm 63, if you're poor, your number is supposed to be less than 23.4. Fair is between 23 and 27. Average between 27 and 31. Good is 31 and 37. Very good between 34 and 38. And anything over 38 is considered excellent. Well, I'm between 47 and 51. So who knows, according to this, despite just doing my strength training, and just doing the activity that I do here, not on purpose, just because there's work that needs to be done, I'm apparently very high cardio fitness, whatever that means. But, the pickleball thing, I used to say to people, I understand you want to go out and do other things, and I get it. So it's kind of like if you're getting in shape and you're getting really strong, it's like saying I'm going to soup up a sports car, but I'm just going to leave it in the garage and I'm never going to take it out for a spin. So I get when people are fit, and Doug McGuff also has talked about how people spontaneously decide they want to be more active because their energy level comes up and they feel good about that. And that's great to a degree. But the thing is that all activity, be it pickleball or anything else, does take a wear and tear in your body. So taking that sports car out for a spin, great, but you are putting mileage on the car and the car is not going to last as long. But I used to say, what's the point of having a sports car if you don't take it out for a spin? But here's the thing, our bodies are not an object that we own that, you could, if the sports car does run out, you could get another sports car. Your body is the only body that you have. And so when you get to be 70, 80, or 90, that's the body you're going to use for your activities of daily living. So dressing, eating, transferring, toileting, all those things. And part of quality of life is making sure if your knees are shot from, jogging, playing pickleball, things like that, it was fun, great. So all I'm saying is proceed with caution. Just another thing is sort of disjointed a little bit, but things that I wanted to throw in here is, I did have a heart attack when I was 42 years old, a mild heart attack. And I want to talk about how my exercise program may have helped or not. So this is just food for thought because I'm one person, so this is proof of absolutely nothing, but food for thought. So first of all, family history. My grandfather on my mother's side at 48 years old of a heart attack. I have several uncles who were his children who died in their 40s of heart disease, and even since then, some cousins. So I'm 63. I have had a mild heart attack, and I have had bypass surgery. Let me think now, 2001 for one, 2007 for the bypass surgery. But I'll tell you a little bit about it. So when I had my heart attack, they didn't put me in emergency because at first they said, well, yeah, he didn't really have a heart attack. It was just angina. Cardiologist came in and said, no, this guy's had a heart attack and he should be in ICU, which is customary when you've had a heart attack to put you in an intensive care unit. And at the time I had insurance for critical illness, which in Canada here will pay out a lump sum if you're diagnosed with an actual myocardial infarction, which is the term for heart attack. Well, I asked a nurse, because of course, being the shallow person that I am, I was seeing dollar signs, and I brought in the definition in my insurance policy, showed it to a nurse and said, will I be able to collect? And she said, no, you don't meet that criteria. Cardiologist, I had him fill out the form. I didn't lie about anything. It was all his things. He filled it out and said I had a heart attack. So what the nurse said to me, speculation, is that the reason my heart attack was super mild is because of my fitness activities, I've created what's called collateral circulation. And actually, Ken Hutchins in his book Heartstrong actually mentions me in the book about the idea that proper strength training can create like its own bypass. So what collateral circulation means is if you have blockages, because atherosclerosis is essentially a plumbing problem. There's all kinds of heart disease problems with valves, things like that. But the typical blockages that you hear about is a plumbing issue, is that what happens is because there's greater perfusion of blood as a result of proper strength training exercise, it creates sort of more branches and other arteries go around the blockage so that if that one does block altogether, you're going to not have a fatal heart attack because there's still blood getting through to the areas of the heart and the damage is less. So other thing to talk about that is a few years later, before I had the triple bypass, I did do a workout one day and I felt heaviness in the chest and I was concerned about it. So I went and got checked out, and I made an appointment with the heart clinic at the hospital, the regional hospital that did it. So I went through ECG, stress tests, all these various things, and they told me, you have an angiogram booked. An angiogram is a procedure where they put dye in and they can see if there's blockages, and we're going to do it because we've booked it, but we don't expect to find anything because you passed everything else, your stress test, everything else, you passed with flying colors. So we're not expecting it, but we've booked it, so we're going to do it anyways. So when I did do the angiogram, sure enough, they found blockages. So the cardiologist at the time, the cardiac surgeon to be specific, said that I was a candidate for bypass surgery, but he said, your situation is such that you might never have an issue because you have such good collateral circulation and whatnot, so you might never have an issue. But if you do have an issue in 20 years from now or 30 years from now, you're going to be older and it's going to be a higher risk surgery. Whereas if you get it done now, you're young, you're healthy, and everything else is going to be relatively low risk surgery. So I said, what would you do? He said that I would do it. So I went ahead and had, this sounds like an oxymoron, they called it elective bypass surgery, I guess, as opposed to emergency bypass surgery. So 8 months later, I did have the bypass surgery, and as anybody who's had bypass surgery, even angioplasty or stents and things like that will tell you, you feel better because all of a sudden there's more oxygen getting to your heart than there was. So flash forward a few years, and I moved to Ontario from, at the time I was in the Maritimes. I moved to Ontario and got a new family doctor. So new family doctor, of course, is asking about my medical history. And I mentioned, what I just told you. And she said, who's your cardiologist? I said, I don't have a cardiologist. And she was like shocked and taken aback, saying, well, you have a history of heart disease, you need to have a cardiologist. And she was going to book an appointment with me to see a cardiologist. So that happened. I went, he put me on a treadmill, and I ran the treadmill. And then he said, I passed with flying colors. And he said, his words were, interestingly, I can't see any damage to your heart, because if you have myocardial infarction, it means that your heart muscle has been deprived of oxygen long enough so that part of the heart muscle has actually died. That's the definition in order to collect critical illness insurance. There has to be part of it. So just angina, if you have a blockage, but you chew some aspirin and you get to the hospital in time and they clear it up before the heart muscle has been damaged, people refer to it as a heart attack, you haven't had myocardial infarction. So I apparently had, but he said, whatever little damage you had seems to have repaired itself, which at one time was considered that didn't happen. Once part of the heart muscle was dead, it was dead. But according to him, and who knows how accurate these tests are, but I'm just relaying what he said, there is no damage that I can see. And I said, all right, well, so how often do I come and see you? I was told I need to have a cardiologist. When do you want to see me next? He said, I don't. So if you have a heart attack again, well, then we'll talk. Other than that, I don't want to see you again. So again, does this prove anything? Absolutely not. I'm one person, one anecdote. But I just thought it would be food for thought that I thought that I would share. And again, going back, I don't do any steady state activity on purpose, and haven't done so, for the longest time. Would I be in shape to go run a 10K? Interestingly, the answer is I couldn't run a 10K because when my previous years, when I did do some running, I injured a calf muscle. And now if I try to jog, usually I can predict, and the few times when I've done some fun runs for charities and things like that, about 2 or 3 kilometers in, the calf muscle cramps up on me again. So that's not going to happen. So, and again, specific adaptation to imposed demands said is, if you do, for whatever reason, want to run a 10K, you have to practice running a 10K. The fact that you don't run 10Ks and you're not able to doesn't mean that you're not aerobically fit. It means that, first of all, running, people who are able to run good times, long distance, become very efficient at running as a result of running. And so somebody who hasn't done it is going to be more inefficient. And of course, they haven't adapted to that particular demand. But of course, if they chose to, they would likely get to that situation much quicker than someone else if they're already strong as a result of proper strength training. Anyways, I jumped from things to thing, hopefully some value. Subscribing to these, sharing these is greatly appreciated. All the very best, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye for now.